The smell of cedar and old dust was still in my lungs when I realized my father was a monster. I was in our attic, holding a newspaper clipping from 1998. A photo of a kidnapped 3-year-old with my exact birthmark and my exact eyes. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from my fiancé, Mark. He said, "Don't worry about the attic, Elena. I'm 3 minutes away." He wasn't supposed to be home for hours. He was tracking my location. And I suddenly realized the man I'm supposed to marry isn't my partner. He's my jailer. If I'm still in this house when he pulls into the driveway, I will never leave it again. Why did the man I called Dad pay for a detective to bury this case 20 years ago? And who is the woman currently drugged into a coma in a Chicago care facility because she knows my real name? Let me take you back to the moment I stopped being Elena Richardson and started being a ghost. Dust motes danced in the beam of Elena Richardson's flashlight, illuminating a yellowed scrap of newsprint wedged behind a rusted trunk. The headline, "Missing Infant, 1998, seared into her vision. Below, floorboards groaned upstairs. Mark's heavy footfalls vibrated through the attic ceiling, rhythmic and deliberate. He didn't call her name. He simply paced, a predator marking territory. Elena shoved the clipping into her pocket, her fingers trembling against the frayed denim. The paper felt brittle, a relic of a life she hadn't known she lived. She reached for the small, smooth river stone in her pocket, tapping it against her thigh in a rhythmic pattern of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The familiar clack, clack, clack against her leg grounded her, a silent tally of the ghosts she carried. Downstairs, the scent of burnt coffee and Mark's sharp, metallic cologne permeated the hallway. He stood by the kitchen island, knuckles white as he gripped a steak knife, methodically slicing an apple into translucent slivers. The sharp crack, crack, crack of his knuckles, pinky to thumb, echoed in the sterile kitchen. Elena knew that sound. It was the sound of a lie being prepared. "Did you finish cleaning up there?" Mark's voice scraped like sandpaper. He didn't turn to face her, his posture rigid, mirroring the geometric precision of the gardens Elena designed for a living. "Almost," Elena whispered. She gripped the banister, her palms slick with sweat. She could feel the unalignment of the room, the way Mark's presence shifted the symmetry into something hostile. He pointed the blade toward the wall clock. 10 minutes until the security system engages. Don't make me reset it." Elena waited until the rhythmic click of his bedroom door echoed through the house. She grabbed the pre-packed duffel hidden behind the laundry hamper, the nylon fabric rasping against the floor. Night air bit at her skin as she slipped through the mudroom, the North Carolina humidity clinging to her like a damp wool blanket. It smelled of stagnant pine and looming rain. She reached her sedan, parked on the grass to muffle the ignition. The engine coughed, then hummed. In the rearview mirror, a single light flickered on in the master bedroom. Elena floored the accelerator, gravel spraying against the undercarriage as the darkened house receded into the jagged silhouette of the tree line. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird seeking exit. The road ahead was a ribbon of gray asphalt swallowed by the dense, uniform pines of the North Carolina backcountry. Elena's eyes darted to the rearview mirror every 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. The white lines on the road flickered past with a hypnotic, strobing effect. The heat was a physical weight, 92 degrees even at midnight, turning her clothes into a second, suffocating skin. Suddenly, 2 pinpricks of light appeared in the distance behind her. They grew rapidly, transforming into the wide, aggressive stance of a black SUV. The vehicle didn't slow. It surged forward, the roar of its engine drowning out the hum of Elena's sedan. A heavy thud vibrated through the chassis as the SUV slammed into her rear fender. The impact jerked Elena's head back, the scent of hot rubber and exhaust filling the cabin. She gripped the wheel, her knuckles as white as Mark's had been. Ahead, the road narrowed into a construction zone. Orange barrels lined the shoulder like plastic sentinels, and the air grew thick with the alkaline, dusty smell of wet, curing concrete. Elena saw the gap, a narrow passage between two massive concrete barriers. It was a structural gamble. She shifted gears, the engine screaming in protest. The SUV lunged again, trying to pit maneuver her into the ravine. Elena waited until the last possible second, then yanked the wheel. Her sedan squealed, weaving through the jagged rebar and raw concrete edges of the site. The SUV, too wide and too fast, clipped a barrier. There was a deafening screech of metal on stone, a shower of sparks that illuminated the dust-choked air. And then silence. Elena didn't look back. She kept driving until the smell of the construction site was replaced by the salty, stagnant air of the airport outskirts. The airport parking lot was a vast, lonely expanse of gray concrete, filled with thousands of silent cars. A biting, dry wind whipped through the open levels, leaching the heat from Elena's body. She found the designated row, her fingers numb as she adjusted her sleeves to cover the nervous twitch in her wrists. "You're late," a voice rasped from the shadows. Michael Davis stepped into the light of a flickering fluorescent bulb. He looked exhausted, his cheap suit smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes. Before speaking, he looked up, his eyes tracing the ceiling. 42 tiles in this section, he muttered, a grounding ritual Elena found strangely comforting. "I was followed," Elena said, her voice trembling. She reached into her pocket, the Riverstone clicking against her phone. 1234. Michael handed her a thick manila envelope. The Miller family. They were in the 1998 files. Robert and Sarah. I found an address in Chicago, but Elena, you need to be careful. This isn't just a cold case. Someone is still paying to keep it quiet. As Elena reached for the file, a shadow detached itself from a nearby concrete pillar. A man in a dark security uniform lunged, his fingers clawing for the envelope. He didn't look like a guard. His movements were too precise, too clinical. Elena didn't hesitate. She pivoted, using the weight of her heavy landscaping boots to drive a kick into the man's shin. He grunted, the sound muffled by the wind. She followed with a sharp elbow to his ribs, a move born of years of hypervigilance. The assailant sprawled onto the oil-stained concrete. "Go," Michael hissed, stepping between Elena and the recovering man. "Get to the terminal. I'll handle this." Elena bolted, the envelope clutched to her chest like a shield. She burst through the sliding glass doors into the sterile, white-lit world of the terminal. The air was filtered and cold, stripped of all human essence. She found a quiet corner near a departure gate and tore open the envelope. Subverted Phase 1. Smart decision. Inside the file, Elena found the original police reports from the 1998 kidnapping. She carefully spread the documents across her lap, her architectural mind mapping out the connections. She looked for the lead detective's signature, expecting a stranger's name. Instead, she saw a name that made the floor feel like it was shifting off-axis. James Thompson. Thompson wasn't just a cop. He was David Richardson's best friend. They had been golfing partners for 30 years. Thompson was the man who had taught Elena how to fly fish when she was 10. This was the breakthrough she needed. If Thompson had handled the case, it meant he had access to all the evidence. She could go to him. He was like an uncle to her. He would have the bedrock truth, the physical proof that her parents had simply rescued her from a bad situation, as they always claimed. She felt a surge of relief. The conspiracy wasn't an external threat. It was something she could solve with a single phone call to a man she trusted. Phase 2. False positive. She pulled out her phone and dialed Thompson's private line. He picked up on the second ring. "Elena, is that you? Your father told me you'd gone missing. We've been worried sick, honey." His voice was the same booming, comforting baritone she remembered. He sounded genuinely relieved. "James, I found something. The Miller case from '98. I'm in the airport. I'm going to Chicago to find them." "Stay right there," Thompson said. "I have the original field notes in my private safe, the ones that never made it into the official record. They prove the Millers were unfit, Elena. It'll put your mind at ease. I'll send a car to pick you up and we'll go over everything. You're doing the right thing, calling me." Elena leaned back against the cold plastic chair, her shoulders dropping for the first time in hours. Thompson was a pillar of the community. With his help, she could confront her parents with the truth without the fear of being hunted. Phase 3. The crack. As she waited, she flipped to the final page of the file Michael had given her. It was a photocopy of a bank ledger from 1999, a year after the kidnapping. She noticed a recurring deposit into a private account. The amounts were large, $50,000 every quarter. Her eyes drifted to the account holder's name. It wasn't her father. It was a holding company called JT Security. The rasp of silk against a collar echoed in her memory. James Thompson's triple tug. He always straightened his tie 3 times before a lie. Zip, zip, zip. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. Elena's blood turned to ice. She looked at the date of the first deposit. It was 2 weeks after the Miller case was officially closed due to lack of evidence. Thompson hadn't been her father's friend. He had been his employee. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. By calling him, she hadn't found an ally. She had alerted the very man responsible for burying her past. She looked toward the terminal entrance. 2 men in suits were already scanning the crowd, their posture rigid and military. They weren't airport security. One of them adjusted his tie. Zip, zip, zip. Thompson hadn't been worried. He had been triangulating her position. The field notes weren't her salvation. They were the bait to bring her back into the fold. She was in a worse position than before. Her location was compromised. Her only lead was the man who had sold her, and the gate was still 20 minutes from boarding. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing to find a new exit in a room that had suddenly become a cage. The flight to Chicago was a blur of recycled air and the low hum of the jet engines. Elena sat in the back row, her hazel eyes restless, watching every passenger who walked down the aisle. When she finally touched down at O'Hare, the sheer scale of the city hit her. A sensory assault of screeching L trains and towering glass. She headed straight for an ATM in the terminal, her hand trembling as she swiped her card. She needed cash for a cab, for a motel, for a life away from the Richardsons. The screen flickered. Transaction denied. Contact your bank. Elena felt a prickle of sweat down her spine. She tried her credit card. Account frozen. She stood frozen in the middle of the frantic commute, the white LED lights of the airport making her feel exposed, like a specimen under David's microscope. Her father had moved faster than she anticipated. He hadn't just tracked her, he had severed her lifeline. She was stranded in a city of millions, with exactly $42 in her pocket, and a manila envelope full of secrets. She took the train toward the industrial outskirts, the metal wheels shrieking on the tracks, a sound that vibrated through her teeth. She found the address Michael had provided, a derelict warehouse near the river. The air smelled of stagnant, oily water and rotting wood. Inside, the space was a maze of rusting crates. In the center stood Robert Miller. He was a slumped figure, his hair a chaotic nest of gray. He was stacking wooden pallets with a slow, mechanical rhythm. "Mr. Miller?" Elena asked, her voice small against the vastness of the warehouse. Robert froze. He didn't turn around. "We don't want any more trouble," he said, his voice rising at the end like a question. "I'm not trouble," Elena said, stepping closer. "My name is Elena. I think you might be my father." Robert turned then, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated hostility. He looked at her face, the hazel eyes, the curve of her jaw, and his breath hitched. But it wasn't a look of love. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost that had ruined his life. "Get out," he hissed. "The police already took everything. My job, my house, my little girl. You Richardsons. You think you can just show up here and play with the pieces? I didn't know," Elena pleaded, reaching out. "Don't touch me," Robert shrieked, the sound echoing off the low-hanging pipes. "I don't make left turns anymore because of what happened. I don't look at people. You look just like the woman who took her. You have her eyes. Get out before I kill you myself." Elena backed away, the smell of oily water suddenly suffocating. She fled the warehouse, the sound of Robert's panicked breathing following her into the humid Chicago afternoon. She found herself standing across the street from a small, sagging house, the Miller family home. It felt like a trap, the warm yellow light in the windows a false comfort. She watched from the shadows of a brick alleyway. A black car pulled up to the curb. A woman stepped out, dressed in sharp, expensive linens. Martha Richardson. Elena watched as her mother, the woman who had raised her, placed a fresh bouquet of lilies on the Miller's porch. Martha pulled a tattered grocery list from her clutch, tracing the word formula with a trembling thumb. She tucked a card into the flowers and retreated to the car. Elena waited until the car disappeared before sprinting to the porch. She grabbed the card. "We are always watching, Elena. Come home before things get messy." Mother. The realization was a cold weight. They weren't just tracking her. They were taunting her. They were using the Millers as a chessboard. "You should have stayed in North Carolina, Elena." Two men stepped out from the shadows of the alley. They were the Richardson family fixers, clean-cut, anonymous, and dangerous. Elena didn't wait for them to close the distance. She reached into her gear bag and pulled out her heavy steel soil probe, a 3-foot rod of sharpened metal used for testing ground density. As the first man lunged, Elena swung the probe with the precision of a woman who spent her life shaping the earth. The steel bit into the man's shoulder with a sickening thud. He cried out, stumbling back. The second man reached for a holster, but Elena was faster. She shoved a heavy stack of discarded newspapers into his path and dived through a low basement window of the neighboring house. The crawl space smelled of damp earth and old coal. She squeezed through the narrow opening, her heart hammering a 4-beat rhythm against her ribs. She emerged 2 blocks away, her clothes torn and stained with Chicago's soot. She had lost her surveillance position, but she had gained a new destination, the care facility. The facility was a pale, sickly green building surrounded by a garden that looked too vibrant to be real. The air inside smelled sharply of bleach, an industrial attempt to cover the scent of slow decay. Elena approached the front desk, her pulse thrumming in her throat. "I'm here to see Sarah Miller," she told the receptionist. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller is in the restricted wing. No visitors without authorization from the primary benefactor. Elena saw an orderly down the hall, a young man with a tired face and a name tag that read, Kevin. She walked toward him, pulling her last $20 bill from her pocket. I need 5 minutes, she whispered, pressing the money into his hand. My mother is in there. Please. Kevin looked at the money, then at the desperation in Elena's eyes. He sighed, a sound of defeated empathy. 5 minutes. If the head nurse sees you, I'm fired. He swiped a key card, and the heavy steel door clicked open. The restricted wing was silent, save for a low, mournful humming that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Nearer, my God, to thee. Elena followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. Sarah Miller sat in a chair by the window, her skin as pale as parchment. Her eyes were glassy, fixed on a point in the distance. She was humming the funeral dirge, her fingers biting into the fabric of her gown. Sarah? Elena whispered. The woman didn't turn. She didn't blink. Elena looked at the chart at the foot of the bed. Sedative protocol, 50 milligrams Thorazine, 3 times daily. Benefactor, Dr. David Richardson. The benefactor wasn't saving Sarah. He was erasing her. He was using his medical credentials to keep the victim of his crime in a chemical cage. Elena reached out and touched Sarah's hand. It was cold, like the river stone in her pocket. I'm going to get you out of here, Elena promised, though she didn't know how. Subverted. Phase 1. Smart decision. Elena noticed a wall-mounted television in the corner of the room, the volume muted. A news crawl caught her eye. Breaking news. Elena Richardson sought for theft. Her own face stared back at her from the screen. The report claimed she had stolen a collection of priceless family heirlooms and was suffering from a severe mental break. It urged the public to report her location to the authorities immediately. Elena didn't panic. She saw this as a tactical error on David's part. By making this public, he had created a paper trail. She could use this. She would turn herself in to the Chicago police, not as a thief, but as a whistleblower. She would demand a lawyer and a public hearing. The Richardsons couldn't hide a public trial. She had the documents from Michael Davis, and she had the evidence of Sarah's forced sedation. This was the move that would bring the whole house of cards down. She felt a surge of cold, calculated confidence. She would walk out the front door and find the nearest officer. Phase 2. False positive. She stood up and adjusted her sleeves. I'll be back for you, she told Sarah. As she walked toward the exit, she saw 2 Chicago police officers entering the lobby. They looked professional, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Elena raised her hands slowly. Officers, my name is Elena Richardson. I'm the person you're looking for, but I have evidence of a crime. The officers didn't draw their weapons. One of them, an older man with a sympathetic face, nodded. We heard about the situation, Miss Richardson. Your father is very worried. He's on his way here now to clear this up. We're just here to keep you safe until he arrives. Elena felt a wave of relief. The system was working. They weren't arresting her. They were protecting her. She sat on a bench in the lobby, her breathing slowing. Phase 3. The crack. The older officer's radio crackled. He stepped away to answer it, but Elena caught a snippet of the transmission. The package is secured. Tell the doctor the garden is clear. The package. Elena's gaze drifted to the officer's belt. He wasn't carrying a standard-issue Chicago PD radio. It was a high-end, private encrypted unit, the kind used by elite security firms. She looked at his badge. The number was 1998. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. The police weren't city employees. They were Richardson's private security force dressed in convincing replicas. David hadn't just used the legal system. He had bypassed it entirely by creating his own version of the law. The doors to the facility hissed open. David Richardson stepped inside, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his unblinking stare fixing on Elena. He looked at his Patek Philippe watch. "You're off schedule, Elena. This agitation is becoming a structural hazard to the family." Elena tried to run, but the officers grabbed her arms. Their grip was like iron. "You're sick, Elena," David said, his doctor voice low and hypnotic. "The theft, the delusions about the Millers, it's a cognitive breakdown. We've already filed the emergency commitment papers. These men are here to transport you to a private clinic where I can oversee your recovery." The trap had closed. By trying to turn herself in, she had walked directly into a kidnapping sanctioned by forged legal documents. She was no longer a fugitive. She was a patient. And in David's world, a patient had no voice. "Wait," Elena gasped, struggling against the guards. "I found it. I found the diary." David's eyes narrowed. The diary? Elena had found a loose floorboard in Sarah's room during her 5 minutes of unauthorized access. Tucked inside was a small, leather-bound book. She had shoved it into her waistband. It was the only thing she had left. "It's all in there," Elena hissed. "How you followed them, how Martha watched the house." David signaled to the guards. They shoved Elena into a small, windowless room off the garden. The air was unnaturally cold, pumped in from a hidden vent. "Give it to me," David commanded. "No." The door opened, and a third figure entered. Mark Sullivan. He didn't look like the man Elena had almost married. His athletic build was rigid, his boy-next-door smile gone. He cracked his knuckles, pinky to thumb. Crack, 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 crack. "Mark?" Elena whispered. "I'm sorry, Elena," Mark said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The Richardsons have been very good to me. They gave me a life I never could have had. You were never supposed to find that clipping." "You knew?" Elena felt the world tilting. "From the beginning?" "I was hired to watch you," Mark said, "to make sure the pre-existing conditions stayed dormant. But you started counting the stones again. You started looking at the attic." "You sold me for a paycheck," Elena said, the betrayal a jagged edge in her chest. "I secured your future," Mark countered. "A life of luxury. All you had to do was stay in the garden I built for you." David stepped forward, a syringe glinting in the sterile light. "The treatment is necessary for the survival of the unit, Elena. You will go back to North Carolina. You will rest. And in time, you will forget these memories, just like you did when you were 4. Elena fought, but the guards pinned her to the cold floor. The scent of bleach and David's clinical soap filled her senses. She felt the sharp prick of the needle in her arm. The world began to blur, the geometric patterns of the ceiling tiles spinning into a chaotic vortex. 1, 2, 3. David counted. Elena's hand clutched the river stone in her pocket one last time before her fingers went limp. She woke in a room she knew too well. The dark mahogany walls and heavy velvet curtains of the Richardson estate. The air was thick, smelling of old wood and the constant, accusatory hiss of the radiator. She was home, but the windows were nailed shut, and a guard stood outside her door. But they had made one mistake. They had left her gear bag in the closet, assuming she was too sedated to move. Elena crawled to the closet, her limbs heavy and leaden. Inside the bag, tucked into a hidden compartment of her landscape design kit, was a small set of precision tools. She worked in the dark, the rhythmic clink of metal on metal her only companion. 1, 2, 3, 4. She dismantled the window casing, her calloused hands working with the muscle memory of a woman who knew how to take things apart to see how they grew. The window swung open. The North Carolina humidity rushed in, smelling of damp pine. Elena climbed onto the trellis, the wood groaning under her weight. She descended like a shadow, her feet hitting the soil she understood better than people. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go to Thompson. She went to the one place the Richardsons couldn't reach with a bribe, the city's largest newspaper. Jennifer Martinez was still at her desk when Elena walked in, covered in garden dirt and carrying a leather-bound diary. "My name is Elena Richardson," she said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "And I have a story about a kidnapping." The confrontation happened 2 days later, in the foyer of the Richardson home. The air was still, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock. David and Martha stood at the base of the stairs, their faces masks of aristocratic indignation. "You've ruined us," Martha whispered, her hand trembling as she touched the ghost list in her clutch. "No," Elena said, stepping into the light. "I've simply restored the original site plan. The foundation was rotten, Martha. It had to be cleared." The diary had been published. The triple tug of James Thompson had been caught on camera by Jennifer's team. The police, the real police, were waiting outside. "I'm taking the estate," Elena said, her voice echoing in the hollow house. "All of it. The legal claim is mine as the sole heir, and I'm liquidating every cent." "You can't," David hissed, his triple scrub ritual becoming frantic as he rubbed his hands together. "It's our legacy." "It's blood money," Elena said. "And it's going to the Millers, all of it. A foundation for Sarah's recovery, a new life for Robert." She turned to Mark, who stood in the corner, looking small and discarded. "And you're just a weed in a garden that doesn't belong to you anymore." Months later, the Chicago summer was fading into a crisp, clear autumn. Elena stood in a public park, her hands deep in the rich, dark soil of a new flower bed. She didn't wear a watch. She didn't count the tiles. In the distance, a crew of maintenance workers was clearing a path. At the head of the group was Robert Miller. He moved with a new strength, his posture upright. He didn't look at Elena, and she didn't approach him. She was a silent guardian, a woman who had traded a palace for a patch of earth. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the riverstone. She looked at it for a long moment, then set it gently into the soil at the base of a young oak tree. She didn't need to count the ghosts anymore. She was exactly where she needed to be. The sun set over the Chicago skyline, the orange light reflecting off the glass towers. Elena stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. The symmetry was finally perfect.